Good afternoon. This is Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beth Shalom, and this is Valley Beth Shalom live and online. Today is the last day of Chol HaMoed Pesach, and as is our custom at VBS, we have lunch and learn during Chol HaMoed. As I said yesterday, I'd be delighted to invite you into my kitchen and cook you a matzah brai, and we could sit down together and enjoy some lunch together. But given the circumstances, this is going to have to do. We can see each other through the window of this medium of Facebook Live. We've been looking together at the texts of the story of Elijah the prophet. We invite Elijah into our homes on Erev Pesach, so I thought it'd be a good idea to get to know the guy a little bit. It's going to be our guest for dinner, after all. We invite him in our homes because in the prophet Malachi, Elijah is identified as the precursor of redemption, the announcer, the messenger of redemption. And so he has always been in Jewish folklore, the one who announces redemption. But as we look into the text, you discover a much deeper and much more nuanced and interesting character. So yesterday we were together. We looked at the text of the Elijah story in the book of Kings. You'll find it in 1 Kings beginning with 16. So if you have a Bible, open up to 1 Kings, which is in the middle, smack in the middle of the Bible. You won't find it in a Chumash. It won't be in the 5 books of Moses, but you will find it in a Bible. Okay? And look for 1 Kings, and look for chapter 16 is where we first meet him. And then there's the contest with the prophets of Baal that we read yesterday in chapter 18. It seems to me that what we have in Elijah is a sort of reiteration of the story of the Exodus. So I don't think it's a complete coincidence that we invite him to the Seder. That yesterday, this contest between Elijah's faith in the God of Israel and the prophets of Baal mirrors, reflects on the contest between Moses and Pharaoh. After all, what is God's purpose in bringing 10 plagues to Egypt? My brother used to ask this question at the Seder every year. He said, look, if God really wanted us out of Egypt, just take us out of Egypt. All right, you want to bring plagues? Fine. Bring one. Why do you need 10? And the purpose of the 10 plagues, at least according to the biblical narrative itself, is that the 10 plagues are there to demonstrate to Pharaoh that he's not God. It's a contest between Pharaoh's conception of the universe and Moses' conception of the universe. Pharaoh, who believes that he is God, that he is at the center of all, that he controls reality, and God, who is prepared to disabuse him of this notion. And so the 10 plagues come one after the other in order to dismantle Pharaoh's arrogance, Pharaoh's sense of himself as the God who rules all. And piece by piece by piece, each of his notions of control over the world are reduced, are diminished, beginning with the Nile River itself and ending with the life of his own firstborn. And then at the very end, when he's drowned in the sea, he himself becomes a victim of his own arrogance. In a certain way, when Elijah confronts the prophets of Baal in the 16th chapter of 1 Kings, he's doing the same thing. It's a visible empirical confrontation of two visions of the universe. Elijah's vision that the universe is run, inhabited, animated by a God of morality, a God that can't be manipulated, a God who is not a projection of our own needs and wants and desires and impulses. And the prophets of Baal, who represent an idolatrous idea that the gods are there to do what we want them to do, that gods can be manipulated by magical incantations, that gods are there as a projection of our own fear. After all, the Baal worship of the Canaanites, and in fact the whole Middle East, the Baal worship was a reflection of our fear of drought, of our fear of starvation, of our vulnerability. As a reflection of our own fear, we imagine this principle of a male God that rains down rain into the world and brings fertility. So these two very different ideas about God, two very different ideas about how God's work in the world, two very different ideas of how the world works. And what Elijah attempts to do is to have a contest between the two. But the problem is that the terms of the contest are pagan terms. Get God to do what I want him to do. See if I can get God to do what I want him to do. Every rabbi, by the way, I'll confess to you, has this experience. A woman comes to me, she's in great distress. I ask her what's wrong. She tells me that she's undergoing some serious medical treatment. I offer her my best wishes, my sympathies. We talk about it. And then she says, that's not really what I wanted, Rabbi. What I really want is a red string. I said, a red string? What's a red string? He says, oh, you know, these rabbis, they sell red strings, and these red strings protect people. I want you to sell me a red string. So I hadn't heard about this at one point. I said to her, how much do they charge for the red string? And she said, $26. I said, my God, I can sell you a whole ball of string for $26. I sell you a case of string for $26. She wasn't amused by that. She said, no, Rabbi, come on, don't hold back from me. Give me the red string. Now, what's the theology of a red string? This poor woman's going to go to a surgery and God's going to see the red string on her wrist and say she's going to be healed. But the patient in the next operating room who doesn't have a red string is not going to make it? Is that the kind of God we worship? That somehow we will force God, manipulate God into protecting us by donning a red string? Is that the theology? Is that really what it is? I mean, what happens there is that you imagine that these symbols then sort of carry these magical powers. And magic is something that lots of people believe in. Not hocus pocus, pull a rabbit out of your hat magic. The kind of magic that says if I do this, then I will be protected. It's a projection of my fear and my vulnerability and my sense of being small and powerless in the world. We were all raised by parents who were at that time much bigger than us and protected us. And if we only did the right thing and propitiated them in the right way and offered them please and thank you and batted our eyes or screamed at the right moment, our parents would do what we asked them to do. And so we imagine the God in heaven does the same thing. I'm not supposed to say this to you, you see, because the rabbis make a lot of money on this kind of stuff. You see, $26 a red string, I could make a living. But it's a silly, it's not only a silly theology, it's a sad theology. Why would you want to live in a world of a God who can be manipulated by a red string? The theology of Israel is a theology of a God who demands morality and runs the world on the basis of morality and points out to us that you have free choices in your morality, but you're going to have to live with the consequences of your morality. And that's the God that Elijah really wants to bring to his people. But in this case, what he does is he has the contest on the basis of the pagan ideal that if this God is real, he'll do what I tell him to do. And sure enough, fire comes down from heaven. And God says, okay, you want to play the game? I'll play the game. I'm really good at this game. Watch. But then the question is, what has Elijah accomplished? What did Moses accomplish? Did Moses truly teach his people about the God of Israel by the 10 plagues, or did that take much longer? Did Elijah accomplish what he tried to accomplish? Let's take a look together. Look at the next story, right? The next story, if we jump all the way to chapter 21, okay? The following events occurred sometime afterwards. This is the Bible's way of saying, I want to order these stories. Naboth the Jezreel owned a vineyard in Jezreel adjoining the palace of King Ahab in Samaria. So it's the guy named Naboth, and he was the king's next door neighbor. Ahab said to Naboth, give me your vineyard that I may have a vegetable garden, since it's right next to the palace, and I'll give you a better vineyard in exchange, or if you prefer, I'll pay you the money. But Naboth says, no, this is my ancestral land. I'm not selling, I'm not giving it away. Ahab went home dispirited and sullen because of the answer Naboth the Jezreel had given him. Now, interesting, Ahab accepts his argument that a man has a right, or family has a right to its ancestral lands. But it bums him out. He's depressed by it. And his wife Jezebel, he turned on his bed and he went down on his bed, laid down on his bed, turned his face away and wouldn't eat. This sullen, immature little fellow. His wife Jezebel comes and says, "Why are you so dispirited you won't eat?" It's a Jewish text, you know. You're sad, eat something. And he said, "I spoke to Naboth and I proposed, sell me the vineyard." But he answered, I will not give you my vineyard. So his wife said to him, "Now is the time to show yourself king over Israel. Rise and eat something and be cheerful. I'll get you the vineyard." So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with a seal and sent the letters to the elders in the same town of Naboth. And she wrote, "Proclaim a fast, seat Naboth at the front of the assembly, and seat two scoundrels opposite him, and let them testify against him. You have reviled God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death." That's interesting. She uses the town and its officials as a tool to carry out this plot. The townsmen, the elders, the nobles lived in the area, did as she said. They wrote the letter, they proclaimed the fast, they seated him there, the scoundrels sat there, they testified against him. Naboth has reviled God and king. They took him outside and they stoned him to death. And they sent word back to Jezebel. Naboth was stoned to death. As soon as Jezebel heard that he was stoned to death, she said to Ahab, "Go and take possession of the vineyard." When the word of the Lord came to Elijah, in verse 17, "Go down and confront King Ahab, for now he is now in Naboth's vineyard that he's taken possession of." And Elijah confronts him. It's much like Nathan confronting King David. Question is this: is the king a god? Is the king's power absolute? Does the king have a right to take what he wants? Does a king have a right to take a life? What are the limits of royal power? And the limit of royal power is not constitutional in this sense. You don't have a Supreme Court that you can go and appeal to. The limit of power in this case is the prophet. The prophet is the conscience of the people. And Elijah goes and he prophesies against the king and says, "I will bring disaster upon you and make a clean sweep of you. I'll cut off from Israel every male belonging to Ahab, bond and free, and I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam." He testifies against him. You have violated God's law. You only rule so long as you rule in line with the covenant, and when you violate that covenant, God takes power, authority away from you. It's a remarkable comment, a remarkable idea. So what happens next? Now we have Elijah in a different role. Before we had Elijah playing the role of Moses at the plagues. But now we have Elijah doing something else. Now we have Elijah teaching a God of morality, a different God entirely. Not a God who is a projection of my need and my fear and my desire, a God who's going to come do what I tell him to do because I asked him to, but a God who demands of human beings that they act in a certain moral way, that they behave in a certain moral pathway. A God who is concerned for a whole world. I mean, who is Naboth? He's just a name in the text, but for this, an entire dynasty is going to fall. He's going to fall because Naboth represents a human being who takes upon himself the authority of God, things that only God should be prepared, should be allowed to do, to give life, to take life. And here, the great question is, does he succeed here in a way that he didn't succeed before? Is he beginning to teach the people of Israel a different idea of God, a different idea of what's expected of you, a different idea of what it means to be an Israelite? Before, what he did was make God into the biggest idol. Here, God is different. Here, God is a God of morality, a God who is looking out for the disenfranchised and the disempowered. That's a very different God. That's a very different idea of God. Now, the person who is opponent here is not Ahab. Ahab is interestingly portrayed here as in some ways, a dupe, a dope, actually. I mean, in some way, he's very weak. Naboth says no, and he goes home, and he's depressed. He moans about it. It's his wife who has the capacity to get things done in the world, but she has a pagan idea of who a king is. For her, the king has all the power. The king owns all the property. The king owns all the lives. She doesn't understand an Israelite king who demands morality of a king, that there is a law above the king, that the king rules only so long as his rule is in line with the strictures of morality taught by this covenant. That's an idea that Jezebel just doesn't get, because it's outside of her bailiwick, because there was only one place in the world at that moment that taught that idea, and that was Israel. She never got that message. That's our message. That's the message of the prophets. That's going to be the conflict between prophets and kings. Kings are going to say, we have ultimate power, and we have to make moral compromises in order to carry out policies that are in the end good for the kingdom. But the problem is that once a king gets used to moral compromises and moral compromises and moral compromises, the boundaries of morality slip away very quickly. Because power does corrupt. Because power does change the way a human being sees him or herself in the world. And the prophet's job is to come along and say, no, your authority is limited to the welfare of your people, but most of all, to the strictures of morality taught by this covenant. It's a completely radical political theory. It's a radical political theory. But now Elijah has to pay the price for that. And the price for that is that Jezebel becomes his enemy. And Jezebel seeks to kill him. And now I'd like you to turn to chapter 19, which is the denouement, the climax of the story. When Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he had put all the prophets to the sword, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, thus and more may the gods do if by tomorrow I have not made you like one of them. She puts a contract out on his life. She's his enemy. And she's the queen. And she controls the army. She controls her husband, that's for sure. She puts a contract out on his life. Frightened, he fled at once for his life. So being a prophet, it carries the dignity of bringing God's word into the world. It carries the dignity of speaking truth to power. It carries the dignity of standing for something important, momentous, crucial in the world, but it carries the singular disadvantage that when you speak truth to power, power tends not to like it. Power comes after you. He flees for his life. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah, and so he's going from the north south. Beersheba, which is as far south in Judah before you hit the Negev, the complete desert. And then he left the servant. He went on himself a day's journey into the wilderness and came to a broom bush and sat down under it and prayed that he might die. This is death by prayer, suicide by prayer. Enough, he cried. Take my life. I'm no better than my fathers. I thought I could bring something new to the people of Israel. I thought I could teach them the God who lives in the world. I thought I could change the trajectory of their collective life. I failed. I failed at this. And as long as I failed, I have no reason to be in the world. So kill me here, God. There's this horrible thing called death by cop, suicide by cop. This is suicide by prayer. Kill me here, God. And God says to him, he laid down, he fell asleep under the bush. An angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." It's a Jewish text. You're depressed. You've lost your reason to be. You have an existential crisis. You can't see any meaning in your life. Good. Look, eat something. Es mein Kind. Have something to eat. So he looked around, and there beside his head was a cake baked on stones and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he lay down again. And the angel wakes him up again and says, "Arise and eat, or the journey will be too much." So he arose and he ate and he drank, and with the strength from that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of God in Horeb. Now, in case you missed the parallels before, here they are. In case you didn't understand that the contest with the prophets of Baal is a reflection, in some ways, an internal biblical critique on the story of the 10 plagues, that this isn't the way that you teach people about God. Here you get it. Because here, 40 days and 40 nights into the wilderness, comes to the mountain of God. Elijah is a reiteration of Moses. It's a reiteration of Moses, but this is a later biblical, not critique, but reworking of the Moses story. Same mountain, same desperate man all by himself. Remember, there was a bush in that story also. Then the word of the Lord came to him and he said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" Here's a principle. For those of you who've studied with me, remember this. Whenever you find a question in the Bible, you have to stop. The questions in the Bible are the reason the Bible was written. If you look at the questions, imagine that the questions are written in red, or they're italicized, or they're underlined. First question in the Bible, God finds Adam hiding in the garden and says, "Ayeka, where are you?" That's what the whole Bible is about. That's what the whole religion is about, answering that question. Where are you in your life? Where are you? What are you doing with your life? God comes to Cain and says, "Where is your brother?" And Cain's sarcastic answer comes in a question, "Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? Am I in charge of my brother? Am I responsible for my brother?" Critical question. Critical question. Abraham asks the most profound question. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat? The judge of all the earth will not do justice? Isaac asks him a question in the later story. Here is the fire and the wood. Where is the sheep for the burnt offering? The questions carry the entire narrative. It's almost like the question came first, and then the narrative was written as a structure in order to give the question support. So here is the question of the narrative. And questions jump off the page because they're not just asked to the character in the story, they're asked to the reader. God doesn't just say to the character in the story, "Ayeka, where are you, Adam?" God doesn't just say to Cain, "Where is your brother?" Abraham doesn't just say to God, "The judge of all the earth won't do justice." Those questions are directed to us. Where are you? Who are you responsible for? What is it you stand for? And here is the question. Here is the question that God asks Elijah, but God asks all of us. Why are you here? What are you doing in the world? What is your purpose? What is your message? What is the word you most want to bring to the world? Remember when God challenged Moses on this very mountain, years and years before this story. He said, "I want to send you to Pharaoh to free my people." And what was Moses' question? Mi anochi. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Mi anochi. Who am I that I should have such a responsibility? Who am I responsible for? Who do I want to be? Who do I want my people to be? Where do I belong? Moses had by that time 3 identities. He was the child of slaves, he was the prince of Egypt, and he was the son-in-law of the priest of Midian. Who am I in the world? And then he goes on in the next paragraph. This is in the 3rd chapter of Exodus. He says the next, "Lo ish dvarim anochi." I'm not a person of words. Which sometimes we used to interpret as a speech impediment, but that's not what it is. I'm a shepherd. I live with sheep. I'm not a public person. It's deeper than that. I'm a private person. I have no words for the world. I have no message for the world. I have nothing I need to say anymore. Great Rabbi Paul McCartney once wrote about him. He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, spending all his nowhere with a nobody. He has no words, doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to. Isn't he a bit like you and me? This is Moses. But what's amazing about Moses is at the end of the story, what happens? The fifth book of the Torah, the last book of the Torah, opens with the words, Ve'ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe al kol adat b'nei Yisrael. The man who was lo ish dvarim, I have no words, now finds words 40 years later. He found his words. He found them inside. He found them in his encounters with God. He found them in his life with his people. He found them in all the pain that he went through. He found words. Here, God says to Elijah, who are you? What are you doing in the world? Why are you here? And Elijah responds, I am moved by zeal for the Lord God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they're out to take my life. I'm the last one. I'm the last Jedi. I'm the last one. I'm the last one with the message. What do I do with a message if I'm the only one? What do I do with the message? How do I proclaim the message? Incidentally, just as a digression for a moment, the phrase is, they have forsaken your covenant. And there's a Midrash which calls him out on that and says, oh no. And that's the reason why Elijah comes to every Brit Milah, because to show him that the people of Israel have maintained the covenant in all the generations following. God says to him, come out and stand on the mountain of the Lord. Now, who was the last person to stand on the mountain of the Lord? It was Moses in the 19th chapter of Exodus, and then again in the 32nd chapter of Exodus. And what happened when Moses stood on the mountain? It quaked, was filled with fire and thunder and smoke and trumpets. But now we get a different message. And lo, the Lord passed by, and there was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. So all of the special effects that Moses had, Elijah witnesses, because that's what he was looking for. I want to proclaim you in the world, God, and I need a stick that turns into a snake. I need another miracle. God says, no, you don't. No, you don't. You want miracles? I'll show you miracles. Here's a tornado, but not God. And here's fire, but not God. And here's an earthquake. Here are all of the natural phenomena that dwarf us, that make us feel so small and powerless and vulnerable in the world. And you think God lives in those things? No. That's not the God you need right now. Maybe at one point in your life you needed that God, but that's not the God you need right now. Where are you going to find God now? Because if you look out there and you look for earthquakes and tornadoes and fires, and you say, I'm waiting for God to talk to me from there, from bushes that burn and don't burn up, from seas that split. Special effects, yes. Daunting, majestic, powerful, no doubt, but not God. The next phrase, classic phrase in the Bible. After all those special effects, what happens next? The translation says a soft murmuring voice. The Hebrew is 3 words. Kol dimama daka. Listen to those words. Kol dimama daka. Dimama means silence. Daka means delicate. Kol means the sound of. The sound of delicate silence. The sound, the voice that reaches us in moments of exquisite peace. Exquisite, beautiful, intricate, deep silence. the call that only can be heard in the deep silence within. See, the problem is that the world is so full of noise. But not just the world full of noise, we're full of noise. So many, so many desires, so many impulses, so many needs. God says, no, not there. Be quiet. Stop thinking about becoming the great prophet Elijah. Just listen to the deep voice within. Call demama daka. Call demama daka. The sound of exquisite silence. The voice that emerges from a deep inner peace. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle about his face and went about and stood at the entrance of the cave. Now, so the earthquake, he didn't wrap the mantle when the tornado came. He didn't wrap his mantle when the fire came. You'd think that a fire would make you recoil. You think that a tornado would make you recoil. You think that an earthquake would drop you to your knees. No. But there's certain silences that we face, certain moments of silence in life. That's what moves him. And Elijah wraps his mantle because he realizes only in that exquisite silence, that's where God lives. That's where God finds him. And so now we have a reiteration of the same story. So God says, why are you here? Now why are you here? And he says, I'm moved for zeal for the Lord God. For the Israelites have forsaken the covenant, torn down your altars, have put your prophets to the sword. I alone left, and I'm out to take my life. And God says, go back the way you came. Now, when you have a story, and you have an event, and then you have the exact same story, what is the storyteller trying to tell you? Trying to describe change. It's very difficult to describe change. How does he change? Elijah came to that mountain seeking signs and wonders. Show me signs, show me wonders, give me powers so that I can convince your people that you are God and you are real. And God says, no, that's not where I live. I'll show you something more important. A God who lives in the deep silence of the soul. A God who lives deeply. A God who lives in your passion and in your love and in your need and in your sense that you live in a world and you're responsible for it. So the second time he comes, he says, now why are you here? And I think Elijah answers him differently the second time. He's more resigned. He's more mature. He's deeper. And he says, I know I don't need signs. I don't need wonders. Now I understand. Now I understand where you live, how to find you. But I understand that you're with me, that I'm not alone. I understand that if I'm not perceiving thunderbolts and earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes, I still am with you. You're still with me. You're still attached to me. You're still with me. And he says, that's what I want you to know. Now go back and proclaim the word that God lives in this people and demands of this people covenantal morality. I think this is a reflection on Pesach. I think that's part of the reason we invite him into our homes. Because what he's telling us is that you don't need plagues, frogs from the sky, to know that there's a God who lives with us in history and demands of us that we be souls worthy of living with a God in history. I want to wish all of you a happy and healthy Pesach, a sweet and good season. Tomorrow, the holiday begins. So tomorrow morning we have prayers at 10 o'clock, of course, online. And on Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. And then we'll have Yizkor at about 10:45. Shabbos, of course, Torah study at 9 o'clock. And then Shabbos davening at 10. I wish you a sweet and a happy and a healthy Pesach. Be safe and be well.